Hello, and welcome to the Brandgym webinar on turbocharged marketing plans. I'm David Nichols, Group Managing Partner, and I'd like to introduce the two other partners who are going to be presenting with me today. First, John.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm John, a partner at the Brandgym.
And hi, I'm David Taylor. I am the founder of the Brandgym and also director of Brandgym Academy. And today we'll be sharing some insights from the latest research paper from the Academy, which is our global center for research, development, and learning. And in addition to insights from this research paper on annual marketing planning, we'll also be sharing insights and on-the-ground learning from over 1,000 brand growth projects that have been carried out by our global team of senior coaches. And this will cover insights from projects covering everything from beer with AB Inbev through to retailing with Tesco, Mars, and other leading companies. And to set the scene and introduce a little bit more about the research project, I'd like to hand over to John, who's going to set the scene for us.
Great, thank you. Yeah, as David said, we've done a lot of research recently amongst marketing directors on the annual marketing plan. And I must admit, we went in with a hypothesis thinking that, in a world of marketing where everything is so dynamic, that perhaps the annual marketing plan was becoming less relevant to people. The reality is that that's actually not the truth at all. And you can see from our data here that amongst all of those that we spoke to, actually everyone, 100%, said that the annual marketing plan was either very important to them or important to them. So the next question we asked was, well, how well do you actually do it? How well do you perform annual marketing planning? And the results were actually quite shocking. So for something that's so important to people, only 12% of those that we spoke to said that their annual marketing planning process was highly effective. So of course, then we were intrigued, what's going on here? How come something that's so important to people is done so badly? And we discovered that there were three main themes emerging around what was not working for people. The first of those was that annual plans were tending to be too short-term and too tactical in their focus. So not long-term enough, not strategic enough. The second point was that they were low on fresh consumer insight, which kind of, is a concern. And then the third one, third issue that we discovered was that the whole process felt too long, too drawn out, and too kind of energy sapping for people. So I'm just going to hand back to David, who'll talk you through the thoughts we've got on how to address these issues.
So let's look at a little overview to what we're going to be covering today in the webinar. We're going to look at three solutions that address the issues raised by John. So we'll look at how to build what we call brand chapter plans, which will create brand strategy delivery in addition to grow your business. We'll look at how to create insight fuel to really drive the project forward. And then we'll finish by looking at how to energize your team rather than draining energy from them. We'll also talk a little bit about next steps. So how can you turbocharge your marketing planning process? And then there'll be time as well at the end to have some Q&A. So please do use the Q&A box that you've got. You can drop in there questions already as we go through, and then we will come back and answer those at the end of the session. So let's start by looking at this concept of brand chapter plans. The obvious way and the most common way that marketing teams still tend to do marketing planning is in a sort of what we call a horizontal process. This is where silo-based teams working on, for example, advertising or in-store marketing or events, all work independently to build the plan for the brand. And the challenge with this process in this way is that we can end up with fragmentation. So here's a real life example from Vodafone on a project we did. When we pulled together the different teams' work on the different product streams, you can see here a whole mishmash of different visual ideas, typefaces, concepts. And this is fragmenting the brand rather than building valuable memory structure for it. Inspiration on how to do this is captured in this concept of fresh consistency. It's a brand balancing act. On the one hand, we do need freshness through new news, but we also need to have some consistency in order to build the brand over the long term. And inspiration on how to do this comes from looking at the world of TV producers and TV series. If you think about your favorite TV program, on the one hand, we have freshness. There are plot twists, there are new characters, there are new locations. But at the same time, we also have consistency. The storyline, the symbols used, the key characters, and the theme music, of course, which is consistent. And in a way, we can think about your annual brand plan a bit like the season for one of these TV series. Think about the episodes of the TV series being equivalent to the series of campaigns for your brand. In this way, what we do is we sort of flip the process. Rather than thinking horizontally in terms of channels, we think vertically in terms of creating integrated, amplified chapters of activity. Looking at the Johnny Walker example of this, we can see how these chapters of activity bring freshness. So here we have an example where we have branded content. We have another chapter looking at the Johnny Walker Black Label, that's a product campaign. And then we have some limited edition packaging as well. So these are the chapters we're talking about. But whilst they're bringing freshness, they're also bringing consistency in terms of the brand idea, keep walking, and in terms of the brand properties, such as the symbol and the slogan, keep walking. And we can see here the really powerful impact this form of fresh consistency can have when we look at the value of the Johnny Walker brand since the beginning of the Keep Walking campaign. So having looked at the principle of chapter planning, I'm going to now hand over to John, who's going to take you through a really fantastic example of how you can build and create a chapter plan.
That's great. Thank you, David. Yes, so the case study that I'm going to talk you through is Marmite. For those of you that don't live in the UK or haven't lived in the UK, I'll just explain what Marmite is. It's basically a yeast extract, sort of a black spread that normally you'd spread on bread or toast. And it's famous in the UK for a brand that you either love or hate. It's probably one of the most polarizing kind of brands around. And in fact, that slogan, you either love it or you hate it, is probably one of the most famous kind of advertising slogans in the UK. I just wanted to sort of point out, first of all, that Marmite is a super distinctive brand. So as well as that incredibly distinctive slogan that I've talked about, this is a product with unbelievably distinctive kind of product, pack structure, and pack design. And in fact, they've barely changed since the brand was launched in 1902, so it's 120 years ago. And also, sort of more recently, it's developed in its communications a very, very distinctive sort of tone of voice. This sort of idea of it being like a spoof kind of documentary, this kind of mockumentary tone. But it's a brand that, you know, has kind of got a little bit stale, or certainly had got a little bit stale over time. So when I was involved in the brand, when I worked at Unilever a few years ago, sales were suffering, share was down, and in fact, other spreads like Nutella, peanut butter, and so on were doing much better. So we spent quite a lot of time with consumers, you know, classic ethnography, spending time looking in their kitchen cupboards, kind of trying to figure out what was going on. And actually, the insight was really interesting. that people were buying Marmite, but they simply weren't using it, or they were using it much, much less frequently. And it was getting kind of pushed to the back of the cupboard and forgotten. So out of that sort of nice insight came a really lovely kind of fresh refresh on the brand idea. So we came up with this idea of love it, hate it, just don't forget it. This idea that almost, something that this polarizing. It's kind of okay to love it. It's kind of okay to hate it. But whatever you do, don't be sort of, ambiguous about it and just kind of forget it. And that led to some really lovely creative work. Skip one. That ran across kind of, a number of different channels. So we produced a really lovely film that was a kind of a really nice parody on kind of animal rescue type programs. And we also ran, very similar creative across outdoor and across social. So you got this idea of a kind of refreshed brand idea being amplified across channels. And with the brand kind of getting its mojo back, the second chapter followed fairly quickly. And that was called Marmite Mind Control. So another kind of comms idea and another little kind of playful twist on the brand idea. So you don't hate it, you love it. So this idea that it's possible to get hypnotized and converted from being a Marmite hater to a Marmite lover. And again, the brand got into its flow and a third chapter followed, which was the idea of the Marmite Gene Project. So a bit more of a kind of an activation here where you would send away for your testing kit and you would be you would discover whether genetically you're more likely to be a Marmite lover or hater. And then most recently, you may have seen this quite recently. There was a chapter which was based around new product. So this was Marmite Dynamite Chili. So the sort of line you can see at the bottom there. So hopefully, you get the sense of this concept of a chapter plan. So Marmite, on one page here, that very, very powerful brand idea, you either love it or you hate it. 4 sort of seamless kind of chapters that naturally roll on from each other, all telling that same Marmite story. And then held together really consistently with great use of brand properties, whether that's the colors, the shape of the jar, the slogan, the tone of voice, etc. So with that, I'll hand back to David.
Thanks very much, John. So having seen the concept of the chapter plan there with that fantastic example from Marmite, let's now look at how we address the second issue that we saw at the beginning, which was the lack of fresh insight, and how we can use insight as fuel to create these ideas for your brand chapter plan. We're going to use an example, which is Carling Black Label. This is a brand of beer in South Africa. We were building on the truth around the trophy, so a trophy-winning beer, and the brand had repositioned around a sort of fresh take on the idea of masculine achievement with this idea of champions deserve champion beer. Now, the brand had the chance to take over a fairly sort of bog standard sponsorship package, which was an annual pre-season soccer match between South Africa's 2 biggest clubs. It was a derby challenge, a bit like Manchester United against Manchester City, and it was called the Vodafone Challenge. The opportunity was to try and do something more with this in order to really both build the business, but also build the brand. So similar to what John talked about on Marmite, it was immersive insight, which was the key to this. So rather than just talking about soccer to people in a focus group environment, it was actually spending time watching people watching soccer. And what you saw was the incredible levels of frustration that people had actually watching the TV. They would be shouting at the screen, trying to say, why has the coach brought on that player? Bring on another player. So a real level of passion and involvement. And this was really where the insight for a chapter came from, which was, what about if the consumer could actually be the coach? So this was a world first. People were voting for the team that they wanted to play in that derby match for real. This is not a fantasy football, it's real life football. This was carried out using a mobile-led activation campaign where people could vote for the player they wanted in a particular position. The teams were then selected and amplified online. So as this thing was being unveiled and progressing, news of the vote was put through the brand's social media. And this culminated with a real live match at Soccer City, which David N. and myself were lucky enough to go and watch live in front of 85,000 spectators and with millions of people watching online. The other twist to this activation was that at halftime, people could vote on their mobile phone for the substitute that they wanted to come on to the match and play to really be the coach. This actually crashed the entire South African mobile network. There was such a demand from people to participate. And what is particularly great about this property is the way that it was amplified across the mix. So we're not just talking about integration where things look the same. We're trying to get different parts of the marketing mix to actually amplify one another. So the launch campaign drove people to vote for the team. PR then amplified this whole voting process. Is it a good thing or a bad thing that people can pick the team? Social media was then sharing the voting, and then we had the experiential experience itself where people could vote. And this amplification is another key aspect of how brand chapter plans work. What is also great is to be able to create a replicable, scalable activation property. And this was the case with Be the Coach. It was launched in 2011. It was then refreshed year after year after year. So by the end in 2019, this property was still going. This means we're building memory structure for the brand. It also means that the team are not constantly reinventing their marketing plan every year. You've got a property and a chapter that can be repeated and refreshed and made bigger and bigger and bigger over the number of years. And this was part of a chapter plan. So we had an initial chapter which was launching the idea of champions deserve champion beer. We then went on to the Be the Champion Coach activation chapter, which is the one we've just talked about. And then we had a third chapter, which was Be the Champion Judge, which was all about a sampling campaign to get beer into the hands of consumers. And here, hopefully you can see, we've got consistency, both in terms of the brand idea that is being brought to life and dramatized, champions deserve champion beer. And also we have consistency through the distinctive brand properties. That's the slogan, it's the brand colors, it's the typeface, and it's the use of the trophy. And it's in this way that we are building the brand in terms of business, but also building it in terms of distinctive memory structure linked to the brand equity. So far, we've seen how to create the concept of a chapter plan, which addresses the first issue John highlighted, which is being a bit short-term and a bit tactical. The chapter plan allows us to have a more strategic, long-term approach to creating your annual marketing plan. We've also seen the second issue that was raised, which was, if you like, creating a plan in a bit of a vacuum. We saw the power of getting fresh, immersive insight to act as fuel to really take the team to new places with their brand planning. The third thing that we highlighted, which we're now going to look at, is how to energize the team rather than draining energy from it. And to do this, I'm going to hand over to David N., who will look at how to go about doing it.
Thanks, David. So, energizing the team. So we're familiar with the brand planning and marketing planning process that takes too long and really drains energy from the team. I am going to use an example to show this, but just going back to the research briefly, more than 75% of our respondents said the process should take less than 3 months, but under half said that it actually does. So even when you have a plan that it will take a short amount of time, it ends up taking longer and draining energy. Great quote from a marketing director saying, you know, we need to streamline it, less is more. So let's look at an example. Momentum is a financial services brand that we've worked with, and their brand idea is about being with their consumers for their journey to success. And they have a large product range, all sorts of different kinds of insurances, investments, savings, as well as advice. So a number of different product houses. So the challenge really is to make a marketing plan that isn't just one TV ad and then a bunch of completely disconnected activations that don't really connect to each other. How can we build it together and use the brand idea to build something that builds memory structure, builds awareness across the business, all these very different products? So there were four things that we did. The first was to create a cross-functional team. So not just marketing and agencies, but marketing, agencies, R&D, product people, sales, all getting together to build this plan together, not separately in silos. So we make sure it's a properly collaborative process. We work together in workshops, and we have clear deadlines for everybody. We don't just go off and work separately. So as you can see here, everyone got to the end of the session and really enjoyed themselves. But that's the first way you can create energy, is by bringing people together. It's very simple, but it works extremely well. The second really is to get some insight fuel. So you've heard from David about what you use it for, but part of getting the insight is doing it in an immersive way. Of course, we will get focus groups. And in this instance with Momentum, we decided to focus on the area of women as leaders. That felt very relevant to the emerging target of young women in business, which was a key target for them. So women as leaders was the passion point area. But rather than just doing focus groups, we did one-on-one immersions with the team. So actually getting the team to meet face-to-face with young female entrepreneurs. Also in the sessions, we got people to bring personal examples. Who do you know yourself who is a young female entrepreneur, to really connect people? And this process of really getting the team to connect with this passion point area really does brings the whole person into the room and brings energy into the process. So immersive insight is number 2. The third area is when you're building these plans, don't just send the agency off to turn your ideas into visuals in the long term. Do it live. So we bring the ideas to life in real time during these sessions. What that does is when we talk about a festival, it ceases to be something, in this case, something abstract, and becomes real. You start thinking about, well, where's the entrance and how do badges work and lanyards and where are the stages? And you get into practical implementation and executional issues much sooner. And then as you can see here on the right-hand side, when it actually turns into reality, Success Festival, it's actually the process of getting to the reality is quicker because you've thought more of it through in the session. It's also, people are much more bought into it when you bring it to life in the session. So bring ideas to life in the session would be our third one. And finally, when it comes to presenting the plan, we would advocate pitching with heart. So don't just present the plan in a standard normal way. Tell the marketing plan as a story in itself, the story of your brand, how it's going to get from where it is now to where you need it to be through the chapters of this plan as a story. We took it one stage further in this case, and we actually featured, because it was based on women as leaders, we actually featured, this is the brand manager as a female leader, to bring it to life to the senior team who are looking at it. So they really get it. They really oh, I see. You're going to take people who are leaders and you're going to tell their story, and it's going to be a whole series of chapters. I get it. And then lastly, show them the money. Show them how each chapter drives the KPIs that you're looking for, whether it be awareness or turn or sales leads, whatever it is. Show how each chapter drives the business. And in this way, you can then energize the senior team behind the plan. And this is, then you've got the cross-functional team, you've got your agencies, you've got your core marketing team, and the senior team, all full of energy about the plan that you've created in much less time. So the result, exactly as in David and John's cases, is a plan of chapters. The challenge here that was particularly difficult was that you've got different products targeted to different people, but nonetheless, we managed to build through chapters, plans that were consistent with the brand properties running throughout, and each of them a chapter in the brand story of taking your journey to success. So whether that's for small businesses, advisors, men or women, it all actually comes together. So bringing energy into the process. Great. So I'd actually like to hand over now back to DT to summarize.
So let's do a quick recap of the key points that we've seen in order to turbocharge your annual marketing plan and address those issues that John highlighted right at the start of our session. The first one is this concept of building a brand chapter plan. Think about yourselves more like TV producers who are going to be creating a season for your brand and creating those integrated, amplified chapters of activity rather than doing marketing planning in a conventional sort of silo-based way. In order to do that, the second key thing is to bring in fresh insight fuel, in particular immersive fuel that really serves as a source of inspiration and creates great energy for the team. And on that subject of energy, the third piece is to really get help to design a process that is going to work at speed, creating quality ideas, but inspiring and energizing your team, rather than what we hear a lot about conventional marketing planning, which is it actually drains energy and takes it away from the team. So really thinking about how you carefully design the process and have it properly facilitated. So where do you go from here? Well, in terms of next steps, what about if you decide that you want to turbocharge your marketing? Well, the first option, one option, is to actually do a turbo brand planning project. This is something that we've done on hundreds of marketing plans for people like AB Inbev and Unilever and BP, WD-40 brand. And this takes you through the key stages that we've discussed. It starts off with immersive passion point insight to really get under the skin of your consumers. It then goes into a high energy idea generation process where we have different teams from the brand team, the functions, the agencies and the Brandgym actually creating ideas. The rapid visualization that David talked about is incredibly powerful. Rather than just leaving with a flip chart full of random post-it notes that someone takes away and hopefully writes up maybe the next week, wouldn't it be more effective to overnight see your ideas actually visualized and come to life so you can start to really feel them, get inspired by them, and start to imagine how they might be implemented? And then the final piece, which is often overlooked, is rather than just a standard bit of PowerPoint to debrief to senior management, thinking about it more like show business in terms of creating a really impactful, creative pitch that brings to life your plan and also shows them the money in terms of how it's going to help you build your business. So that's how a turbo brand planning project can work. An alternative way, another option to sort of start to tap into the concept of turbo marketing is the Mastering Brand Growth Program. Turbo marketing is one of the 8 modules we cover on this program. It's a program that we've had over 400 people participate in from companies such as AB Inbev, Plardis, Kraft Heinz. And it's a highly practical program. You can see here 97% of people agreeing that it equipped them with practical tools, boosted their brand growth know-how and help them be more effective in their job. And the nice little treat for people like yourselves attending today's webinar is there's a 7-day offer. If you sign up to the program in the next 7 days, you get 20% off the normal price by using the code webinar20, and that kicks off on April the 17th. So that may be something also worth considering. So what we're going to do now is to hand back to David, who is going to host for us the Q&A session. So this is a chance now, either you maybe have put your question into the Q&A box, which is great, or please now have a chance to do that if you want to add in a question while we're talking, and we'll have a little bit of a discussion to try and answer your questions. So if we can head over now to the Q&A session.
Yes, thanks. Yeah, I can see that I've got the Q&A box open. There's quite a number of questions. One that a couple of people have answered is about this presentation, and the answer is yes. There will be an email going out after the webinar to all of you with a link to the presentation you have just seen, as well as a recording, just, you know, if you want to hear our lovely voices one more time. So you will get that presentation. So I'll take the first question. I'll put it to DT. So all very well and good if you're a mega brand with multi-million budgets. Does this apply to small brands with small budgets?
That's a great question. And actually, in my experience, the smaller brands with limited budgets get almost more value from this sort of approach, because if you have a small budget, you really need to maximize the bang you're getting for your marketing buck. And the benefit of a chapter plan approach is that you're really dialing up the distinctiveness of your brand and therefore maximizing the effects of your marketing. And whilst we've done it for big companies that we maybe talked about today, we've also done it for small entrepreneurial companies. We've done it for charities, for example, who have very limited budgets. So it's definitely something that can work whether you're big or small, and also work across different sectors. We've done it for business to consumer brands and also business to business brands. So yes, absolutely. If you're a smaller brand with a more limited budget, it's almost the most value you'll get, because you'll get more bang for your branding buck.
Okay, well, I've got a question for John. If we could just do one thing to improve our marketing plan straight away, what would that be? Just in a kind of in one hit, what would you say?
Probably, I think, just make more choices. I think actually Marmite's a really good example. So, you know, Marmite's not a huge brand. Just linking it back to the first question, it's probably about a 40 million net sales, something like that. About 10% of that is invested in media. Probably about half of the media goes on, invest in marketing, probably about half of that goes on media. So probably an annual media budget of about 2 million a year. And, you know, it's got pretty simple marketing objectives, which are to increase penetration through sort of improving sort of mental awareness. But at the same time, you get hundreds and hundreds of ideas that come at you all of the time, you know, both of your own and from other functions. So, I don't know, use the vitamin B content to communicate to, you know, schools, celebrate the King's coronation, back Tesco through their Halloween event, whatever it happens to be. And if you're not careful, that 2 million could be spread so thinly and in a way that does nothing to really build the brand. So I think the chapter planning process forces you to make hard choices. And really, a brand like Marmite can probably afford to support 1 or 2 chapters in the course of the year. And I would say much, much better to back 1 or 2, you know, big ideas which are consistent with your overall brand idea, rather than spread yourselves too thinly. And I know that's much harder to do than it is to say, but it would be my one main piece of advice, which is just make more choices.
And actually, there was a question from Peter who was saying, so how long typically would those chapters, those Marmite chapters, be for? How long would they last in the market?
Yeah, Marmite's a slightly different example, I think, to some of the others that we showed, in that those 4 chapters that I shared covered a period probably of about 6 years, 7 years, something like that. So, you know, a chapter a year, maybe a second chapter in a year for a brand of Marmite's size is probably about right. When I've worked on much larger brands, so for example, Walker's Crisps in the UK, which is Lay's in most parts of the world, you know, Walker's as a brand would typically have, you know, 6 or 7 kind of chapters in the course of the year. So it's largely dependent upon the brand, the category you're in, your competitive set, but importantly, you know, the level of support that you put behind the brand.
Okay.
I mean, the Carling Black Label example, just to give that one as an example, you know, the sort of Be the Coach chapter, which is maybe a bigger brand, is probably a 2 to 3 month period, and maybe doing 3 or 4 of those a year. And I think the thing that we haven't had a chance to talk about, but it's really important, is what we call before, during, after. So if you take something like an activation event, like that football match, often what teams are doing is putting all their effort onto the actual event itself, which is actually only attended by, in that case, 85,000 people. The trick is actually the before stage building up to it, to make sure you're really maximizing the interest and excitement in the build up to it. And in that way, what they got is 85,000 people attended the match, but in the first year, 15 million people voted. In the second year, 22 million, which is almost the population of South Africa. So it's that before stage is important. Then you've got the during stage, which is actually the activation itself. And then also the thing that's often overlooked is the after. So it's how do you actually capture content and then further amplify it after. So in that case, what you're looking at is the actual chapters itself are probably like maybe 2, 3, or even 4 month sort of period. And then, you know, if you're a big brand and you can afford it, maybe you can do 3 or 4 of those a year. It's probably about the maximum to have really big chapters. And then if you're a smaller brand, maybe it's your 1 or 2, you know, annual chapters that you're doing. But the principle really is really, as John said, fewer, bigger, better, to really focus, and then really amplify in order to maximize the impact that each of those chapters is given, rather than as marketeers, what we often do is think we've ticked that box, right? We've launched that product, onto the next thing to get through our to-do lists. But by doing that, we're throwing so many things at the consumer, the risk is that nothing really lands.
One question that I'll answer from Caroline. You said, what about not invented here syndrome, when you've got lots of different agencies all going, oh, my idea is the best one. How do you deal with, you know, the great idea that comes from the digital agency and the main advertising agency going off in a hump because they didn't come up with it? Well, the solution really is that collaborative cross-functional team is getting everybody on board at the same time in the same place to work on it together. And you get them bought in. You say, right, we are going to do this together. We're not going to go off and do it in silos. And that in itself is a big move forward. And you see the kind of, oh, we're the agencies in the room going, oh, we're really doing it. There's the digital agency, there's the media agency. Oh, look, there's R&D, there's the different we're actually going to do this together. So it is an issue, but that's the kind of the benefit of doing these big cross-functional workshops. It's a very different way to do marketing planning, but that's how you address that not invented here syndrome. And
I'll just build on that, David. I think you see that. I mean, the power of that, if you can get past that initial feeling of, you know, silo-based thinking where agencies are trying to present their own ideas, by getting them together from the beginning, you then see the power of that cross-pollination. So on the Be the Coach idea, the mobile agency had this ability to allow people to vote. You know, a sponsorship team said, hey, we've got this property, which is the Vodacom Cup. And then you start to then cross-fertilize ideas. And then, you know, the comms agency was very central in actually the idea of getting on board a famous football coach. So people start to see the power and value of collaboration because they've been involved from the beginning. They've had the same insight. And I think that is really critical, rather than, you know, having people working. You have people working separately, of course, they're going to create their own separate ideas. Yep. So that cross-functional from the beginning, you know, is really, really critical.
Great. And I got a question for you, John, from Aaron, saying, Bram, so what length of time should we be building our marketing plans for? Is it the traditional 12 months or 2 years or 80, you know, any view on that?
sort of a fairly eternal question, that isn't it? It comes up a lot. I've always thought that if you've got this kind of 4-2-1 kind of thinking in place, you're pretty well set. So, you know, 4 quarters planned in some high level of detail, 2 halves planned in the sort of next level of detail, so you broadly know what's coming up, and then the year out, the 3rd year, you've got some sort of themes maybe that you're kind of working on that you'll start to make more of as you get a little bit closer to the time. I think one of the issues about the 12-month kind of block and only returning to it after 12 months is that you have that sort of slightly awkward period between years if you're not careful. So a lot of businesses that I know each of us work for will do a kind of a rolling review type process, so that you're sort of in that sort of 18-month out type period. You're constantly kind of working on the next level of detail and kind of course correcting based on what you're learning as you go. So, but broadly, you won't go too far wrong if you're thinking kind of 4 quarters, 2 halves, and a year.
Great, thanks. Question for you, DT. Chapter versus campaign.
So I think, on that? So I think that the difference in the idea of a chapter is it is in effect is built on a campaign. So if you like, Be the Coach was a campaign. I think it becomes a chapter when it's really fully amplified throughout the whole mix. Because otherwise you could have a campaign that would be the Coach, which would be running, and at the same time, maybe back to this point of focus, I'm running another campaign doing sampling, and I've got a 3rd campaign. So really it becomes a chapter when it becomes the single-minded focus for the business as a whole, and the whole business gets behind it. And secondly, I think also that it really fully dramatizes the brand idea. So a campaign may be doing something for the business, but it might not be dramatizing explicitly the brand idea, be it love it or hate it for Marmite, or champion to serve champion beer for Carling Black Label. So that's really the big difference, which I think differentiates a simple campaign from a brand chapter. Just to quickly build on the point about the planning, the long-term planning. The other thing that I hope people have taken out from today is, if you do this process and you can create these really powerful brand properties, such as Be the Coach, for example, that also helps with your long-term planning. Because if that's going to become a replicable, scalable chapter, I know I'm going to be doing that chapter next year and even the year after. And so therefore you can start the planning process and the creativity process immediately. You don't have to, as John said, pause and come back 12 months later. And those big, bold, really exciting chapters need that sort of planning. Think about Red Bull and, throwing a guy out in the middle of space, Felix Baumgarten, I think he was called. You can't plan that with 6 weeks notice. That took years and years to plan. So you have to have that longer term thinking in order to have the bigger, bolder, more breakthrough ideas. So that's why that sort of longer term vision, and that's where I say where replicable, scalable brand properties can come in.
Great. Question for John from your experience. Very practical question. This, I like this one, which is, okay, annual brand planning process happens every year. How do you fit that alongside? Hang on, we need to do long-term brand strategy. So how do those two things work together if you've got to rethink the brand positioning?
Gosh, I think ideally, sequentially. So, as we said in the presentation, I don't think any annual brand planning process should go on longer than sort of 2 or 3 months. I think that's when energy starts to die, and the whole thing just feels like it's kind of a bit of a box ticking kind of exercise. So I think to keep it fresh and dynamic, probably like a 2 or 3 month window. And ideally, in the weeks preceding that, if you have a pretty well-established kind of 3 to 5 year strategic plan, you would be reviewing that, seeing what's changed, seeing what hasn't, basically kind of refreshing your strat plan. so that you go into that 2 to 3 month period of kind of brand planning, you know, kind of with sort of firm strategic foundations. Of course, you know, if you don't have a really good, you know, strategic plan, or if something dramatic has changed within your category or for your brand, you'd probably want to spend a little bit more time doing the strategic work up front. But yeah, hopefully that's a helpful answer.
Great. And just a quick one, DT, how long typically does this kind of process can take that we're talking about, the turbo process? So
I think, you know, probably, I mean, in the ideal time frame that was highlighted from the research, you know, we typically, it could be 10 to 12 weeks if you're doing, especially if you're doing a whole fresh insight process, and then going into, you know, a series of workshops. However, having said that, we've done it. If you you may remember David N going to Malaysia and working on a dairy brand, and where it was done in 5 days.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah, that was it almost killed us, but we had 2 facilitators, and that went from insight to brand positioning to idea generation to idea exploration live with consumers into the final chapter plan in 5 days. So it can go as fast as that if you want to, or it can be done at a more sort of gradual pace, maybe over 8 to 10 weeks or anywhere in between. So certainly in our case, it can go as fast as you're ready to go. Yeah. And if you have the great thing is you have the right process, we get what we call it the Brandgym quality at speed. So what you're not doing is trading off speed for quality. If you have the right process with the right inputs, the right team in the room, the right fresh insight, visualizing overnight, which is, you know, what we would do on a project where we're actually sending ideas off and they come back magically visualized the following morning. This is what enables you to actually shortcut the process and accelerate it while still getting, you know, fantastic quality of output at the end.
Great, thanks. I've got one for, John, you might as well have a go at this one. Should we be doing chapters kind of around the 4 Ps? You know, we'll do one on product, we'll do one on price. Is that a way that you could build marketing plans?
I think it's a good process to go through as you're developing ideas which might ultimately kind of form chapters. But I don't think you need to be so sort of linear in your thinking that you have a, you know, product chapter followed by a pack chapter followed by a pricing premium chapter or whatever. But I would certainly, I mean, you know, use the discipline to help you generate ideas. They're good lenses to kind of look through.
Good.
And the great thing about, just to say, I think the power of the process that we showed earlier, the turbo planning process, is that you start in insight and ideas mode. And we always say when we're running projects, we say go wide. So typically teams are going to be coming up with maybe 40 or 50 chapter ideas that cover all those Ps. There's then an initial screening to reduce them down. But the way that the process works, which is forcing people to capture their ideas in a very simple 1-page format, we call it an idea card, means that you can present maybe 20, 25 ideas in the workshop to actually get down to the final 3 or 4. So you can look at those Ps, as John said, as stimulus to initially generate ideas, but then come down to the ones that really build the business and build the brand, rather than necessarily needing to then, you know, hit all those Ps in terms of execution. And then the other benefit is that what we say is the ideas that don't get selected, very importantly, can go in the fridge. So you've got all those ideas. You come out with this amazing booklet with like maybe 40 fantastic 1-page ideas. And even though some of those won't go directly into the process in terms of the plan, they can go in the fridge for the future and maybe get brought out again in the future to be used, you know, to actually develop the plan.
Great. Okay. I think we might draw it to a close there. I've got a long list of really quite detailed questions, but I think we've covered the main topics. So I'd just like to say thanks very much, everyone. Thanks to David and John. Thanks to all of you for joining. As I said before, we will be sending an email with a link to that presentation. If you need to contact us, here are our emails. There is a link to our website in the chat. And in that email, there'll be a link to a recording of this presentation if you want to hear the kind of the flavor behind the presentation as well. So once again, thank you very much for joining, and I hope to see you again next time. Good afternoon.